Next on Garden Line, a masterfully manicured yard in Aberdeen, what to look for in sun-tolerant annuals,
Sweet potato vine is another one that's been pretty popular,
and planting transplants.
This program is funded in part by Swiftel Communications.
Hello and welcome to Garden Line. I'm John Kiekefer. Tonight we will go into the greenhouse to learn which annuals are best for sunny areas, as well as things to look for when selecting seedlings to transplant. And we will feature a well-manicured homeowner's yard in the Aberdeen area. Joining me in the studio to answer your questions tonight are Mike Mechnig, Extension Weed Specialist.
Good to be here, John.
Rhoda Burrows, Extension Horticulturalist.
Good to be here.
And Larry Osborne, Extension Plant Pathologist.
How you doing, John?
The phone number for you to call tonight is 1-866-595-SDSU. Again, that is 1-866-595-7378. Helping answer the phones tonight are a group of Brookings Master Gardeners and Friends of Garden Line. Please provide them with as many details as possible about your garden problem, when it first appeared, and any surrounding plants with your question. Before we get to your questions tonight, Garden Line visited with Dave Graper, Extension Horticulturalist, in a greenhouse to learn which varieties of annuals are good choices for sunny areas.
Last week we focused on plants that are tolerant of shady conditions. This week we're going to focus on plants that really like it out in the sun. Of course, petunias have probably been one of the most popular plants adapted to the sunny locations. And there's been a lot of work with petunias over the years, many of them working with groups of plants called the wave series. There's all different kinds of wave plants, but the big difference with these is that they produce a lot of flowers, they spread out over a large area, and just bloom all summer long. A related group of plants are the calibrachoas, which also spread out. Sometimes they're called million bells because of the lots of tiny small flowers that they have. Again, a great plant out there in the sun. Salvias have been another very popular plant. Of course, there are many different types of salvias out there that do well in the sun or in cases part shade. But there's some new ones that are coming out that are really a showstopper as far as the bright blue and reds and pinks and whites in the flowers. So look for some of those. Another very important group of plants that is relatively new to the greenhouse scene are the angelonias, or summer snapdragons. Unlike the typical snapdragons that kind of weaken when it gets too hot and dry, these plants like the heat. They come in upright forms as well as trailing forms in quite a wide variety of colors, and they again will bloom pretty much all season long. Another important area for the sun is to use some of those attractive foliage plants. This is Purple Night Alternanthera. Big, bright, bold, dark-colored foliage. Really a neat accent plant to show off some of those other plants that might be in the garden. Another neat plant that is gaining more popularity are the lantanas. These come in, again, a wide variety of flowers, like it hot, really good producing flowers all season long once again. Another relatively new plant are the ornamental millets. Purple Majesty was an All-America winner a couple years ago. A new one that's just come out is called Purple Baron. It's much like Purple Majesty, but it only gets about 2 feet tall instead of the 3 or 4 feet tall that we see with the large ornamental millet. Sweet potato vine is another one that's been pretty popular. Greens, burgundies, and variegated foliage like this, again, good in sun and also will tolerate part sun. Very interesting plant for a container or for an area where that can cascade down the side. And lastly, I wanted to point out some of the new dianthus that have come out. Typically, I think of dianthus as kind of a cool season plant. There's a bunch of newer dianthus that are hybrids with Sweet Williams that give you beautiful cut flower stems, about 2 feet tall, bloom all summer long if you keep cutting them back. Wonderful plants for that sunny garden.
Okay. Okay, each week on Garden Line here we go around the table and hit some of the hot topics for the week, and we start tonight with Mike Mechnig. What do you have for us?
Well, there's a lot of creeping weeds coming into the lawn and the landscape lately. Last week we talked about creeping bellflower, a real tough weed, and there's another real tough creeper out there, creeping Charlie or ground ivy. A lot of people might see this flowering now. It gets a little purple flower. It's in the mint family, so when you mow it, a lot of times you'll get that minty type smell. And here we've got a picture there. You might recognize those small little scallop shaped leaves, and it just kind of dominates those shady areas and maybe even crowding out some of the grass. It's a perennial, and so it keeps coming back year after year. The next slide we can see, in the next picture we might see those little purple flowers that might be popping up right now. Nice looking plant, but like I say, it can crowd out the grass and become a problem. What do you do about it? Well, it's not real sensitive to herbicides. Herbicides are probably the easiest control option, and you know, it's a perennial, so you're really going to want to spray that in the fall, usually in September, and then maybe again in October. You could maybe spray it now to kind of defoliate it with any of the typical broadleaf type herbicides, the Trimex, Weed B Gones, things like that. But at the same time, you're going to have to cure the underlying cause of this problem, and part of the problem is you just have a thin turf because it's in a real shady area. So while you're working on controlling this weed, you're also going to want to work on seeding in some shade-tolerant grasses, maybe some shade-tolerant fescues, things like that. If you had a real shady environment, you might want to just forget grass altogether and go with like a landscape type thing, hostas, that sort of thing. So some different options there, but again, as we're controlling this, we want to work in some shady grasses. Also, keep your mowing height up 2.5 to 3 inches. Non-herbicide options, there's really not a lot out there. It does kind of spread above ground, kind of like a strawberry plant, so sometimes people can kind of rake out some of that creeping Charlie, but you're often going to leave a little bit left that'll keep on spreading. Sometimes people have tried borax. They might put in 8 ounces of borax and 2.5 gallons of water for 1,000 square feet. But the borax, that can kill your grass too, and so that's not always the best option either. So non-herbicide options are tricky. So the herbicide thing, you could spray it now for some defoliation, or this September, and then again in mid-October. To try to control it, but get those shade-tolerant grasses worked in while you're at it.
Okay. Another weed that's kind of similar. I don't know if it's the same or not. Henbit.
Yeah, henbit is another weed in the mint family. Looks very similar, but it doesn't really creep above the ground quite like creeping Charlie or ground ivy. So the henbit, you might see that in your landscapes. Certainly it's a problem there. You can just pull that out. Mulching is a good control option in landscapes, but henbit, fortunately, is not nearly as much of a problem in the lawns.
A little easier to control.
Yep, definitely.
Okay, good. All right, Rhoda, what do you have for us tonight?
Well, the weather is finally warming up for us, and some of us got some frost damage last week. As far as our trees and shrubs, it's a matter of waiting and seeing what the damage was. You may need to do some pruning to prune off any frost damaged tips, but mostly it's a case of wait and see at this point. As we mentioned, once you start getting crabgrass coming up, that means it's time to fertilize the grass as well. So we'd like to see cool season grasses, which most of our lawns are, fertilized when they're actively growing. And right now, if you live at least in Rapid, I've had to mow a couple times already, so it's time to get that fertilizer down.
Okay, thanks, Rhoda. And Larry, I'm assuming you're going to talk about the falling leaves tonight.
Well, it's autumn in Brookings. No, that's not true. My yard, my backyard is just completely covered with ash leaves. And I've noticed it as I've driven to work in town. Lots and lots of trees are just losing their leaves. They just started to come out. Well, the answer is maybe ash anthracnose. You see a picture in the upper corner there of my backyard. And this is just the beginning of the storm, so to speak. That was yesterday morning. This morning, you can't even see my patio for the ash leaves that are covering the ground, and they're leathery and light green. So you know that they aren't necessarily frost damaged. Could be some cold damage making the trees lose their leaves, but there's an up-close picture. You see those tan lesions and then the maybe purplish brown spots all over the leaf. That's a fungus. It's causing those leaves to make a chemical reaction, and the plant actually loses the leaves because of the stress, so to speak. Don't worry though, your ash trees are not going to die. They'll live long enough to be affected by chainsaw blight or ash borer or whatever else we might throw at them. Of course, they're our most common landscape tree in urban settings. This is a fungal blight. There's the name Pneumoniella fraxina. But again, it's mainly cosmetic. A lot of hardwood trees get similar type anthracnose diseases. Right now, the secret is throughout the rest of the year, keep that tree healthy. Plenty of water when it needs it. Don't overwater it. We don't want to drown the roots. But keep that tree otherwise healthy. It'll grow out a new set of leaves shortly. Should be okay well into the next decade or two until the ash borer or whatever else might take it out. So that's ash anthracnose.
You mentioned the other hardwoods. No chance of this one spreading to the other trees?
No, they're pretty host specific. The ash anthracnose sticks to ashes. The thing is, though, the weather conditions that favor one probably favor all of these. So you're likely to see this on your maples, some of the other trees as well. Now, there's a lot of other foliar blights that maybe don't cause the leaves to fall. Don't necessarily mistake all of these for ash anthracnose. But in general, treating hardwood trees for foliar disease, it's not practical. Nothing we can really do about that in terms of chemical or other cultural management outside of taking care of that tree.
Okay. Thanks, Larry. Recently, Garden Line was in Aberdeen and visited the home of Charlene and Christo de Villiers and got an early look at their yard. Here's a glimpse of their masterfully manicured and ornamented landscaping. Okay, we get into that time of the show where we start answering questions. This is the part everybody looks forward to, right? And number to call again tonight is 1-866-595-7378. And we'll start out with a few questions that we've gotten in. Okay, first question we've got, headed your way, Rhoda. Tomatoes planted in black new soil this year. They're wondering what they can do to keep the tomatoes from developing the black spots that we saw last year in them. This comes to us from Garrettson tonight.
Well, I think either Larry or I could answer that one, but the black spots are likely either bacterial or fungal spots, and most of those will overwinter in soil. So the first thing we want to do is provide a barrier between the lower leaves and the soil. That can be plastic mulch, it can be other kinds of mulch, but some sort of barrier. Now some of those will also blow in the wind, and there's not much you can do other than a preventative fungicide. But keep an eye out throughout the summer, and when you first start seeing some spots appear, that's on the lower leaves, particularly below the first fruit, you can just go ahead and remove those leaves, and that'll really slow down the progress.
Yeah. One thing people are seeing on tomato that kind of disconcerts them, obviously blossom end rot, and we'll get those questions, but I don't think they're talking about that necessarily. I think they're talking about specks. Bacterial speck is a common one, and bacterial speck actually can come in on the seed. So if you've bought transplants and you're going to plant those in your garden, not a lot to do, but if you're starting some seed, there are some methods to maybe surface sterilize that seed. A really quick hot water bath. I don't know, we don't want to give them too long before you kill the seeds, but so a hot water bath could control some of that seed-borne bacterial speck.
Okay, sounds good. We got a lot of questions coming in on ash trees tonight,
sure.
of course. So we got a couple of them coming in. Most of them I think we answered in the piece earlier. But one of the questions that came in from Watertown here, we got a question about frost-related leaf drop in ash, and is that a possibility? And then they follow up with that and they say from about the bottom of the tree to 4 feet up the trunk, they've got what appears to be foaming on the tree when it rains.
Oh, good one. Good question. And feel free to jump in too if you like, Rhoda, but likely they're seeing a couple of different things. Certainly frost-induced leaf drop is a possibility. The plant catches a little too much cold air, and the same kind of reaction can happen in a lot of plants. Abscisic acid and other hormones are produced that mimic the same kind of conditions at fruit or leaf drop. And so the plant drops those leaves and then realizes, well, wait a minute, it's still spring and it needs a new flush of growth, and it does that. The foaming business that they're talking about, there's a good chance they're dealing with some bacterial flux. Every time it rains, it's increases the water potential in the soil, pushing up through that big tube, which is basically the vascular system of the tree, and can produce what we call slime flux or bacterial flux. And that could be one answer. Anything else come to your mind, Rhoda?
Not offhand.
I'd say they're probably dealing with a bacterial flux. In general, that tree can live for many, many years with that bacterial infection, essentially. Probably won't kill the tree until it becomes stressed for other reasons. But it is an indication that it's got bacterial infection inside the vascular tissue.
Okay. All right, back to Rhoda, I think, here. We've got a question about butterfly bush in South Dakota. They want to know if there's a hardy form. The Zone 5s don't make it. And this one comes to us from Mitchell.
Mitchell. They are Zone 5, and no, there is not a hardy form for them. They will overwinter in many locations, but they'll die back to the ground and then come up from the ground. One thing you might try is put a good layer of mulch over in the fall. You know, put a foot of leaves or something over the base of it, and yes, it will die back, but it'll come back and still bloom on new wood. So if you're a real fan of it, that would be one possibility.
Any advantage to maybe planting it closer to a foundation or trying to get into a more sheltered spot like that?
Look for a sheltered spot, certainly. We can get into problems with like a south side of the house or something where it will come out of dormancy too early and then have this problem that a lot of South Dakota has experienced in the last week of getting some frost damage. So sheltered from the wind, but
can almost be too protected.
Right.
Okay. All right, we go back to a lawn question, lawn disease question.
Okay.
Oh, this is a good one. Snow mold on a lawn.
Yeah.
They had a lot of it, they raked it and cleared it up, but there are a few patches that look like dog damage, but they say that's not possible. I take it they don't have a dog. Brown patches are where most snow was last winter. Also, they reseeded it, but the seed hasn't come up. They're wondering about shelf life on grass seed.
Yeah, well, lots of good questions there, really. Number of things that can happen with that snow mold. Not only do we have a couple of fungi that really attack our grass when the ground is warm and the snow provides a nice moist environment. The fungi grow underneath that snow cover. And what they end up doing is feeding off the tissue that is either dying from frost or even some of the live tissue. But the fungus grows and the lawn looks really tough when it comes out of the wintertime. The snow melts, leaves dead grass blades sticking out everywhere. Usually the roots, the crowns are healthy and the grass regenerates, but it might take a little while in some extra hard-hit spots. More likely what you're dealing with are some other fungi that have attacked the crowns and the roots of those plants. Good idea to interseed some things with those. You might, if they truly are dead, and you'll know that by now, if the grass is not regenerating at all, those spots are dead, go ahead and rake that grass, the crowns out of there, get that reworked, put some fresh grass seed in there. Grass seed does have a shelf life. If it was kept fairly warm, probably has really reduced the germination rate. You can keep that in your refrigerator for a year or two, or in a cold cellar, maybe as long as it's dry, can keep for a year or two, and and not worry too much. Even a few years if it's kept very well, but they do have a shelf life.
So go buy new grass seed if you're going to try it again.
Right, that's right.
Okay, good advice, I think. Talking about dogs and damage to dogs now. Got an email question that says there's an email going around the dogs could be harmed if they eat cocoa mulch. Is this true?
I've heard this. Dave talked about this one time, but I can't recall the problem with.
Well, dogs are actually have a reaction to chocolate, and so the cocoa mulch also has that same substance in it. So if you've got a dog that's sensitive to chocolate, and apparently, and if you get enough for any dog, it will be a problem. It's kind of hard to imagine that a dog would want to eat cocoa mulch, but
I think it does smell. Cocoa mulch does have a chocolate smell to it, and they're attracted to that. I happen to know the answer. It's theobromine. It's the name of the chemical. We had a dog just about bite the dust from that particular compound. So yeah.
So stay away from the cocoa mulch.
Well, not from mulch, but from candy bar.
From a candy bar that was left laying around.
All right. Okay. Looks like vegetable questions here. This one comes to us from Hill City. You're planting turnips and looks like rhubarb maybe? Rotate them. Maybe? Could be rutabaga. That could be. Rotate them every year, and yet she gets little worms in the fruit. So sometimes there's more than one worm in there. How should she prevent those? She's tried things from, well, let's see, it says she's using cow manure for fertilizer. She applies it every 2 to 3 years, not every year. And they don't go into locations where she had parsnips or carrots.
Could be that they're dealing with root knot nematode, and they're not actually going to see a worm per se, but she may be experiencing the misshapen roots and calling that worm damage. Root knot nematode attacks lots of our root crops, any of the dicots, carrots, parsnips, rutabagas, all these. And if that's the deal, then they're not going to get away from that in a couple of years of rotation. That nematode will stay in the soil for a long time. You'll notice this on carrots especially. Carrots, instead of a nice long taper, you might end up with just a mass of unusable root. But as far as other root pests, there certainly are some worms in the soil, I would think, that could attack.
One other possibility might be a root maggot that attacks carrots and other sorts of things. And with that, it can be difficult to get down the insecticide at the right time if you spray it. It has a foliar. I believe there's some baits for that. Look for 7 bait. I believe that's labeled for root maggots. Another option for organic growers is to grow underneath a row cover, and the row cover will keep the adult flies from landing on the foliage and allowing that life cycle to persist.
So this isn't something that likely to get rid of just by rotating, obviously, but she says she rotates every year.
Yeah.
So
hopefully she's rotating from a root crop to something else. I would assume so, but it could still be coming in from at least small distances. It's hard to rotate far enough with a garden.
Okay. Disease question here.
Okay.
And this one comes to us from out of state, Edgerton, Minnesota.
Goodness.
It says, I have some what I'm told is a Canadian red tree on my acreage. I have some problems with black knot on them. I've been cutting out the affected limbs, but would like to know if there's a chemical treatment that I can use, and if so, what are some common name products I can use?
Well, I don't know about the effectiveness of the common name products, but certainly there are some fungicides that are used on our stone fruit crops and plums and things like that. But this is probably a plum. Is that Canadian red? That's a variety, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct? They're dealing with black knot. It's those large black, almost coal black growths on the twigs of your plum trees. Those things can be pruned out, of course, and that will help reduce some of the inoculum. But do that in the winter time. Right now is not the time to do that. Go well into the healthy tissue to get well beyond the fungal infection that's going on in that branch. maybe 6 inches or so. Would that be a fair distance, Rhoda? So prune 5 or 6 or 7 inches into the healthy tissue to get rid of those knots, get rid of those in the wintertime. Probably something like, I would guess chlorothalonil would do okay as a protective spray, but it's going to happen fairly early in the season. Those things are effective right away in the springtime, if I'm not mistaken.
Shuck split is the timing for the fungicide, and that's probably about right now. I would guess.
There you go. See?
As soon as the blossoms are starting to come off the newly forming fruit is just about that time. We do have a publication on black knot through the Extension Service too. So if you're in South Dakota, contact your local office, or you can look online, and it's available online.
Yeah. Well, good answer.
We'll get Mike into the mix now. We got a question coming to us from Beersford, and using a 20 mule team borax solution for creeping Charlie, what you talked about. And they're wondering if you've ever used it.
I have not ever used it. I am not experienced in that area. I mean, here's the deal. What you're going to do is you're just going to kind of defoliate it, and this is a perennial weed, and so you're probably going to get some regeneration again, and so this is going to be, you're going to just be continuously defoliating it. The problem is you get too much. I mean, we talked about some of the rates they talk about are 8 ounces and 2.5 gallons for 1,000 square feet. But you get too hot, or if you make too many applications, you're going to burn your grass, which can be a problem too. So you're not going to gain much there. So I've not tried it. Maybe this is an experiment. If you got an area, I wouldn't cover your whole lawn with this. But if you got a small area, you want to give it a try, we'll throw it out there. Some people have had success, of course. Many have not. So
I'd like to jump in there too. Caution people not to use it in their gardens. Some of the vegetables are very sensitive to boron, and it doesn't take much to get too much. Legumes are very sensitive.
Okay. Yep. Good advice. All right. Blueberries. This one comes to us from Barnard, South Dakota. How and what variety do you plant for this area? He said they planted some last year that he bought on the internet. They did well last year. They winter killed. Says lost all but 2 of 12 plants. So he lost 10 of 12 plants. What varieties do you use for this area, and how do you culture them?
Well, my first suggestion is forget the blueberries and grow Juneberries instead, because they're adapted for our soils and our climate. However, I know there are a lot of people that just gotta have a blueberry. If you do, it's got to be very low pH soil, and our soils are very high. So usually what we have to end up doing is amend a bed with purchased soil rather than even try to change our own soil pH. We need a pH of about 5.0 for blueberries. So it's very, very difficult to get South Dakota soils down to that. So a lot of peat moss, maybe some artificial soil mix, bring in and use sulfur to help bring down the pH. One of the things that we often see with blueberries is they get a little stressed by too high pH, and then they winter kill. They don't have the tolerance to the winter. If you do, fix up a bed for them and get that pH down, what you want to look for is releases from Minnesota. Ones like Polaris, North Blue, North Sky. They're half-high blueberries that are hybrids from Minnesota, and those are the ones that you really want to look for.
Okay. Got a question on tulips, and I'm not sure whether we're going to send this to Larry or to Rhoda here. Comes to us as an emailed question, again from Edgerton, Minnesota. Wow. Have some tulips that were planted 15 to 20 years ago. They became overcrowded and were dug up and planted in a new bed. The original planting was red and yellow, but the replanted ones are now striped. Is this a virus? How do you diagnose it if it is, and what do you do?
Well, good. Well, I was going to try and send this over to Rhoda, but turns out this is a plant disease question. Likely they have tulip mosaic virus. This happened to me in my own landscape, my own garden. We planted red tulips, and they came red 3 or 4 years in a row. Finally, one year, one of those tulips came just a beautiful fire pattern on the bloom. The leaves were a little bit mosaic as well, and it was a little shorter than it used to be. So the other tulips were just maybe an inch or so taller. That's infected with a virus. It's not a deadly virus. In fact, it can be quite beautiful. I think it's one that I'd like to keep that tulip around. Unfortunately, our tulip bed disappeared. But anyway, they do have a virus most likely. These things don't cross-pollinate and all of a sudden become color broken, do they?
You could theoretically get some tulip seeding, but that's pretty unusual.
Yeah. Likely they're dealing with tulip mosaic. I don't think we could diagnose that in any other reasonable way without some considerable expense. I would say enjoy the tulip if they look beautiful otherwise. Maybe dig those up and share those out. These were some famous tulip bulbs of history, selling for what the equivalent of $20,000 or $30,000 today, back in Amsterdam many years ago, hundreds of years ago.
Okay, dig them up and share them.
There you have it.
All right. All right, we're going to take a few minutes and we're going to go back to the greenhouse, this time with Rhoda Burrows, Extension Horticulturalist. Rhoda shows us different examples of seedling plants, weak and sickly compared to strong and healthy, and which is best to pick for planting in your garden.
Good evening. We're in the SDSU research greenhouses, and behind me you see plants that are ready to go out to McCrory Gardens. Most of the bedding plants for McCrory are raised here in these greenhouses. So it's a fun place to be in the spring with all these bright flowers around us. I'd like to show you right now some tips for picking out transplants at your local garden center. And I have an assortment with me today, some of them that I bought and some were from home. Right now I'd like to show you 3 different tomato plants. We have here a pretty pathetic looking little guy. He's turned kind of purplish around the veins and is chlorotic or yellow around the tips. Now this guy was doing pretty well, but he got hit by that cold spell and so he's been set back. We have here what we really like to see, nice stocky plants, not too tall, nice deep green color. These plants would be ideal for planting out in your garden. Do you want to hold off until the temperatures are in the 50s and 60s at night for the most part? So give it another week or 2 before you plant these out. And finally here I hate to admit it, but these come from my own basement where I've been growing plants under fluorescent light, and these have stretched up a little bit. Didn't get quite enough fertilizer. But let's take a peek at the root systems on these transplants. We have pretty good root development here. Starting to see a little bit of circling, but not too bad. This is about ideal. We look at these. Again, we've got pretty good root development, not too root bound, just about right. This would take off very readily. I want to show you one that has way more roots packed into that poor little container. This thing's really looking for fresh soil. See how it's starting to brown? You want to avoid these if you have the opportunity. If you can get one like these 2 instead, you would choose that over this. Once these roots start to get packed in like that, the plant kind of shuts down for a while. So if you transplant something like this, it's going to take longer to get established than if you plant something like, show you a cole crop here. Those roots are all nice and white and fresh, not too many. So that's what you want to look for. With a broccoli, we're looking for a plant no bigger than this. Broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower, this is an ideal size.
Okay, and we come back with a few more questions tonight. Again, if you still want to call in, the number here is 1-866-595-7378. We go back to questions. We got another weed question here. Quack grass growing around rose bushes. They're wondering if they covered the roses, could they spray for the quack grass using Roundup or something else?
Yeah, that's the temptation, but boy, is it risky. And there's really not a lot of good, herbicide options, unfortunately, in that type of situation. But going back to the Roundup thing, I mean, I've even made this mistake myself, where you think that you're being really careful. In fact, maybe you'll put on some rubber gloves and get a paper towel and just wipe the Roundup onto those weeds, and then you come back a couple weeks later and everything just seems to be dying. It's just so easy. If you just scrape the rose branch or anything like that, it could cause some serious injury or kill those roses. And so if you try to sneak in there with a Roundup, just keep in mind it's going to be very risky. Otherwise, there's just really no other good option. I mean, there are some herbicides out there. If you kind of hunt around enough, you can find like a grass be gone, but really those are mostly intended for annual grasses, and they'll only suppress perennial grasses. So those won't really be a good option either, although they might provide some suppression. Best option is just if you can kind of get in there and weed out the quack grass the best you can, mulching, those types of things are going to be the best option.
Okay. We got a peony question, and this one is a little bit longer. I'm thinking probably going to Rhoda again. A row of about 20 plants of peonies, 13 to 14 years old, and several of them in the middle of the year seem stunted. There's not a lot of new growth in height. They get a slight curl to the leaves and they turn slightly yellow. It's about 6 to 10 of them in the middle of the row. So they say they're all in that same climate and environment. And they all start growing at the same time, but the middle ones slow down and are slower than ever. They also have fewer buds on them. They don't know of any herbicide in the vicinity that could be causing problems, so anything they can do about their peonies.
Peony decline. How's that for an answer?
Making up new peony diseases here.
Any thoughts, Rhoda?
My first thought is that it may be that the roots are getting into a little pocket of soil that's not as fertile, or we even sometimes see roots after a number of years get down to a little packet of Tordon or something that was put down years ago. I don't think that's probably the case here because we're not talking distortion, but the curling makes me wonder if there might be an aphid or something like that involved. I think the best option might be once you start to see some symptoms, bring in a sample to the local office. Do you have other ideas?
Well, the only thing is they say it's the middle that's causing the problem. The middle of the row is the most affected, and I'm thinking maybe some competition. If it doesn't really say that they're not vigorous necessarily, they're just slower and not as big as the ends. I would guess maybe just some plant competition going on, light and nutrient and water competition. What do you think? That's kind of your neighborhood.
Competition?
Are they competing with one another, do you suppose?
Jeez, it could be a variety of issues. There's so many issues that can just slow down growth. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
Or even a drainage problem.
Right.
Absolutely. That might be either the center point for a drainage or not getting enough moisture, I guess. Being a site picture would be nice. There are educators nearby that might be able to visit with. Down in Yankton County, we have a horticultural educator, somebody to visit with about that. I'd say lots of different things could be causing this. Some pictures, some samples, those kind of things would help diagnose the problem.
So even though it seems like it's one row, they should all be same environment and same climate, we might really be talking about
soil's going to be really variable. We think they're, we look at a flat piece of ground and think, well, it's got to be all the same underneath, but you can have variations in the subsoil surface that, my little yard, I'd have anywhere from 12 inches to 6 inches of topsoil above the clay. So sometimes there can just be a vein running through that you're not aware of that eventually affects things.
Okay. Call up your local extension educator and get them out there and see what they can do for
Sounds
you.
like it's below ground, though, probably.
Okay, good advice. Okay, a little simpler question, I think, here. This one comes to us from Lennox. It could come from just about anywhere, Mike. Best thing to do to get rid of dandelions?
Yeah, boy, dandelions have really been going like gangbusters here lately, and now they're starting to fluff out and starting to see the seed spread and that sort of thing. So people are getting a little jumpy to do something about it. Dandelions, well, a number of options out there. Herbicide-wise, you know, remember that's a perennial, so you could spray 2,4-D or into the weed be gones, that sort of thing. That's going to, you know, mostly defoliate them. A lot of them may come back, and so really in the fall is the best time to control dandelions with herbicides. Non-herbicide options, a lot of dandelion pullers out there and that sort of thing. Just keep in mind, though, if we're going to go out there and pull them, you really got to get a good chunk of that root. Probably 3/4 of that root is really what you're going to need to get. Smaller dandelions, maybe you can get by with a little less, but that's a tough job to dig them out by hand if you're looking for a non-herbicide option. But yeah, herbicide-wise, we could suppress them now, and at least that'll help prevent some seed production. But really, we want to go back in the fall, late fall, you know, when the tree leaves are kind of turning, or maybe even they're falling. That'll be the best time to control dandelions with herbicides like 2,4-D or Weed Be Gone, Trimec, that sort of thing.
So they're obvious now. We think that we'd want to do something about them now, but you really want to wait.
It sure is okay to do something now to prevent seed production. But that's mostly what we're doing. They might come back over the summer. You know, maybe you might get 60% control right now. But if you do it in the fall, you're looking at, you know, maybe getting 90% control. So it makes a big difference.
Okay. Keep track of it and go back in the fall.
That's right.
All right. We got another, this one looks like they're pretty sure it's a root maggot. When planting onion sets, what can I put in the row to prevent onion maggots, or something that I can do later on for onion maggots?
Boy.
I believe there's a 7 granular product. Check on your local stores, but I believe that's labeled for onions.
Boy, you're looking at the wrong guy.
Okay. So make sure you read those labels, right?
Make sure it's labeled for vegetables.
Okay. Keep going on then. We've got an invasive grass in Sturgis. It's a broadleafed grass. It has 6-inch to 7-inch deep roots, huge network of roots. They say it's strangling peonies. The grass roots are actually growing through 1-inch peony roots. They want to know, first of all, what kind of grass. It can grow hip high, they say, as a plant. And then what will kill it? Do they spray it or dig it or do both?
Yeah, this might be kind of the same problem we had with the roses there earlier. It could be the same type of grass species. You mentioned it was a broadleaf grass.
Yeah, that's what it says.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say what grass
It
species.
might just mean it quacked.
Yeah, like a wider grass, a wider leaf grass.
That would be my thought.
But, you know, so who knows. But, yeah, some of these perennial grasses, and this happens in your garden too. If you get quackgrass or even smooth brome in your garden, it's a perennial grass. It spreads by, you know, roots kind of just below the surface. But when those roots are moving, they will pierce anything. They'll go right through a potato tuber, might go through a peony root, that type of thing. Nothing stops them. They're just going to keep on going. So, yeah, these perennial grasses are kind of wicked in that sense. How do you control it in your peony? Just like the roses, there's just not, I mean, there's nothing you can just really spray to get rid of it. Going to just have to go, you know, the old-fashioned way and just kind of hand pull the best you can and suppress it that way. Like I say, the grass be gone type sprays might suppress it, but that's only going to be temporary as well. So no easy answers to control perennial grasses and any of our perennial type flowers. It's just it's a tough deal.
Okay. All right. We go to a tall growing forsythia in Platte. And they're saying it's growing so tall they'd like to know if they can cut it back so it will not be so tall. How much can they cut back? Can they do it now?
Once it's done blooming, and I assume that will be soon, if not already at Platte, is the ideal time to cut them. And forsythia, you have your option if you want to retain bloom so that you have return bloom next year. Just take out about 1/3 of the shrub and but take each twig that you're taking down all the way down to the ground. The other option would be to cut it off just a few inches above the ground and let it regrow. You may not get blossoms yet next year. It may be a couple years before it recovers from that. But
Okay. And
John, if I could go back to the peony question.
sure, we'll backtrack.
Just occurred to me, one thing you could do is a lot of those perennial grasses will come up really early in the spring, so before your peonies. So at that point, maybe you could spray some of those areas with Roundup or something like that to control some of those grasses before your peonies come up.
All right. Make sure they're not showing up.
Same trick to do in your garden, by the way, as well. You could spray Roundup over your garden and control some of those perennial grasses before you plant your garden as well to control things.
You just want to make sure nothing's growing already.
You want to make sure nothing is growing. That's right.
Okay. All right. So there is an option out there.
Yep, there we go. We came through with something.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
And we're going to bounce right back to plant here, kind of jumping back and forth. They're wondering if they can plant a variegated dogwood shrub now or wait until a better time.
they don't say whether it's bare root or containerized. I'm going to assume it's probably containerized, and in that case, anytime now is basically with containerized. I really don't like to see it like the heat of the summer, but with containerized, theoretically, you can plant throughout the growing season and be fine. If it's bare root, as long as it hasn't leafed out yet, you can still plant it, assuming the roots are still in good shape.
Okay. All right. Another planting question from Sioux Falls. We've got a clematis that's 25 to 30 years old. And they're wondering if they can divide that root ball, I guess get 2 plants out of 1.
I don't believe clematis is one that you can divide, but you can take cuttings off of it and root cuttings, and they might want to do that instead.
Okay. All right, we got a lilac question here. This comes to us from Sioux Falls as well. We've got lilacs that are done blooming. Should they cut off the dead blooms or leave them till later, or just leave them alone? If they cut them off, will it improve next year's blooms?
Oh, I doubt it.
If this is our common lilac that doesn't seem to have problems with having enough energy, if you have the time and energy to cut them off, you may prefer that look, but if you don't worry about it.
Okay, sounds good. All right, we've got another weed in a perennial garden question here.
Oh boy.
Coming at us thick and fast, right?
Yeah.
From Winter, can you put Roundup on an asparagus patch?
Yeah, well, again, only before those asparagus spears start to emerge, or maybe in the fall if you were to happen to, late fall and mow off the growth and that sort of thing and have some grass coming back, but otherwise not. And again, the temptation's going to be maybe, I can sneak in there between those spears and be real careful. But boy, keep in mind, if you get any Roundup on those green spears at all, it could be all over for that asparagus. So really want to watch out for that. So again, yeah, really you got to be careful in that sort of situation. Only before the spears come up could you put some Roundup on. Okay.
I have heard some recommendations. If you do a complete harvest where you're getting rid of every visible spear, and then go ahead and do Roundup. If you do that again, you still want to be real careful, because if you've got any cut surface there that could take it up, that makes me nervous.
Or any little bit of green tissue, that you cut maybe above the soil surface, the Roundup could get in. And Roundup is tricky. Sometimes you might not, you might injure it the first year, and then it might stay injured for a year or so later, and that's, can kind of keep haunting you in the future if you do kind of mess it up. So, I would be, maybe you could get away with it, but that's still kind of a risky situation.
Okay. Leave them alone or do it when they're not growing.
Yeah, get them early. You got to get the thing cleaned early, yep.
Okay, we've got a couple of container garden questions. First one is from Rapid City. Is it practical to grow musk or acorn squash in a container? If so, how big a container do you need, and what varieties would you recommend to grow in those containers? It's a little different, isn't it?
There are now a couple varieties of bush squash, and I can't say for certain, but I there may be one or two of the acorn squash varieties that are actually bush type. I don't know of any muskmelon that are bush type. So some people do grow squash and melons and gourds and that sort of thing by trellising them up, and then you actually have to put something underneath the fruit to support it, as otherwise it'll actually drop off the vine. So theoretically, boy, I'd want at least a 10-gallon container probably to support that. Otherwise, you're going to have trouble getting enough water to the plant as the plant gets big. So theoretically, you can, and if you do, let us know how it goes.
Yeah, I would think something maybe like a summer squash might do okay if you had a big enough.
The zucchini would, you can.
Something with smaller fruit.
Right.
Something you want to harvest soon.
Zucchini grows anywhere, right?
That's right. I think, you'd still have too many to eat.
Sure.
I still have to give them away.
Okay, switching from vegetables in containers to flowers. Petunias and snapdragons, will they do well in pots or other containers? And how do you get them to continue to bloom?
Petunias, we've got several different varieties, and they tend to be a little different in requirements. Now the vining types, some of the more recent entries into the market, are a little bit more fussy about rebloom. We've got to make sure that we're giving them fertilizer on a regular basis. If they get a little starved for nitrogen at some point, they tend to quit blooming. So with those, you kind of need to watch. If it's one of the older varieties, they were a lot less fussy in terms of that. Snapdragons, it's a matter of just removing the old blossoms, and both petunias and snapdragons should do very well in containers.
You just pinch those snapdragon blossoms off? Is that what you do?
Yep.
And we use a 10-10-10 on ours. Is that a reasonable fertilizer to use for?
I think that would be a good choice.
Okay, something
particularly
with balance.
Since you're probably not going to have a lot of soil in a container, that you do need to give it a complete fertilizer.
Okay.
Just once, or do you go back in and do it a couple times?
If you either need to use a slow release that will release during the summer, or come in, and I'd say with some of these petunias, probably weekly or bi-weekly at the most stretched out.
Okay. We'll go back to you, Larry.
All right.
We've got a mushroom question here.
Oh, you bet.
We've got mushrooms growing under a maple tree in the front yard. 2 to 3 bunches of brown mushrooms pop up. They keep returning even after removing them, and they keep returning for about a month every spring.
Yeah.
This is the 3rd year in a row. How do they get rid of them?
Well, you're doing the right thing. There's not really much to do to get rid of mushrooms. We get a lot of questions like that. People want to know if they can put down, say, like a herbicide or a fungicide and stop that growth. Some of the fungicides might suppress the growth, but I'd say you risk damaging your turf. Really what you've got there is too much organic matter somewhere. It might be a dead root or some thatch in the lawn, and those mushrooms are growing on that carbon and nitrogen source. Depending on the type of mushroom, most of the mushrooms that are coming this time of year aren't real harmful. We don't want to eat them necessarily, but they're not going to poison your children real quickly. If the children get out and eat a mushroom out in the springtime, a lot of times our amanitas and some of the other more rapidly toxic fungi are a little later into the summer. But in any case, remove those, decapitate the mushroom, you might say. Get rid of those caps, just rake that down. It's good nitrogen for your lawn, but you might want to spread it out. If you have a bluegrass lawn, and these are coming up more in the grass than in the tree area, really get down and get that lawn dethatched. Likely there's a lot of rhizome material and old stems and things that are probably not helping your turf either, and get rid of that material. That's what the mushroom feeds on, basically. Could be that you've got a dead root from the tree and they're living on the fungus. So if the tree is otherwise healthy, maybe nothing to do there. But
okay, rake them in and leave them alone.
Yeah, I'd say just remove those caps as often as they come up and keep the turf healthy, and not too much nitrogen, though. That's going to feed the mushrooms even more. So
okay, sounds good. All right, that is all the time we have this evening. Just to let you know, Garden Line repeats twice each week on South Dakota Public Broadcasting's Digital Channel 3, also known as the Create Channel. The encore broadcast can be seen Thursdays at 11 a.m. Central and Saturdays at 4 p.m. Central. Check your local listings to find SDPBTV3. Thanks tonight to our panel of experts, Mike Mechnig, Extension Weed Specialist, Rhoda Burrows, Extension Horticulturalist, and Larry Osborne, Extension Plant Pathologist. And thank you tonight to our phone volunteers, a group of Brookings Master Gardeners and Friends of Garden Line. Thanks to all of you for watching tonight and calling in with your questions. Have a good evening.
This program is funded in part by Swiftel Communications.